Thank you very much, everybody. My name is Becky Slack, and I'm co-director of Agenda, which is a strategic communications organisation. We work across civil society, including for World Habitat. I'm absolutely delighted to be joining you here today and hosting this panel discussion. Thank you very much for having me. In addition to my communications work, I also have worked as a social affairs journalist, reporting on housing and homelessness, and I chair events at political party conferences where the housing crisis has been a regular topic for discussion, and yet it feels like over the 15 or so years that I've been doing that, the conversation hasn't really moved on, and we still keep discussing the same challenges over and over again. And I think that Matt and Kwadwo have given us some really excellent insights into why that might be, and I would like to pick up on some of that in a bit more detail as we go along. We're usually holding politicians to account, is what I normally do, and focusing on all that is wrong, but we are also here today to talk about what works and what we should be doing more of. And I know that, Susan, you've been doing some really excellent work with your organisation at Homes for Good, and I wonder whether we might kick off with you. Can you give us a bit of a picture of life in Glasgow, I believe it is where you work? What are the factors that are driving homelessness there, and how are you responding to that challenge?
Yeah. Okay. So I suppose what Homes for Good is doing, or what we've done in the last 12 years, is try to create something as an alternative to a lack of social housing or homelessness. What can we do with what we've got? I'm a great believer in, while we're all waiting for the 39 billion to get spent, what happens right now? What can we do with what we've got? So what I had in front of me was the private rented sector. I was a landlord already. I was also somebody who was interested in social business and the whole idea of creating change for people with that. So what I identified was that there's aversion in the private rented sector to work with people in receipt of benefits and people who've been homeless, and all of the stigmas that go along with that. And in my naivety, I thought, I'm going to create a portfolio of housing which is affordable for people who are on benefits. That was my first point. So it's got to be at the housing benefit rate, whatever rate that is, not exempt, housing benefit rate so that somebody can afford it. And that was really what we've done. So we have raised investment, hard job, and we've created a portfolio of homes for people who, some of those homes are used for temporary accommodation, but actually it's beautiful temporary accommodation in the community. It is not hostels, and it's not hotels, and it's not office blocks. And the people who live in our homes are on low incomes. They are on social housing waiting lists, and we celebrate when somebody leaves us because they get a housing association property. And so that's what we've done in Glasgow. We've created a portfolio of about 360 homes over the last 12 years, and we're just desperate to do more. Bit of a plug for investment there. But the point is, it's not that difficult to do it in Glasgow. It's harder in other parts of the country, and that's just because there's a unique circumstance of house prices and things. What's interesting, though, is that homelessness is changing rapidly in Glasgow, and I was interested in, I think, when Matt was saying about we've got, I think, double the number of referrals from homeless, I think they call them Section 5 referrals, I think, in Scotland. Housing associations are taking double the amount of referrals from homelessness into housing associations than is happening in England. But what we've actually just seen in some stats that were released yesterday is that the reason that people are coming into homelessness in Scotland is shifting, and 46% is about relationship breakdown. So does that mean that potentially people are living in overcrowded situations? They are also on the social housing list, and that reaches breaking point as well. So, and we also have in Scotland, and in Glasgow in particular, a significant number of refugees, and Scotland is so welcoming to refugees and asylum seekers, but that then creates a conflict when the Home Office does bulk approvals of asylum seekers. It instantly becomes a city homelessness situation. So it's complex, but I think what I would say is you're right about the private rented sector being broken, but there are areas where it can work really, really well, and I think that we've managed to show that and hopefully amplify that so that other people can follow.
Brilliant. Just to pick up on your point about investment, how easy has it been for you to find the investment, and what are the other sort of financial mechanisms that might be helpful for you to do more of that kind of thing?
The one-word answer, the word that came to mind, that's what I've got to say. Matt said we had to provoke people today. Torturous.
Torturous, right.
I think I've spent 12 years, I've raised £25 million in 12 years, and I think at one of the round tables that we had with World Habitat, I think I probably shocked people by saying I should have been able to raise 4 times that with the amount of time that I've put in. It's been difficult because of investors, you know, if you're starting off, you want people who need homes to get them. You start where they are on their income levels. That doesn't necessarily, then it's hard to find the investment that matches that income level. So I would say in the early years, 2012, post-housing crash, it was much easier, low interest rate environment. Now it's become extremely hard. And that's where we need, you know, we need the public sector to want people to get homes. We also need investors to absolutely want people to have homes more than they want a level of return. We just need that. They're the ingredients that we need to make it happen.
Yeah, thank you. Rick, can I introduce you now, please? You are Rick Henderson, CEO of Homeless Link. You've got members across all areas of the country. Can you share a few of their experiences, and in particular, sort of what are the drivers for homelessness that you're noticing, and what have the trends been over the last, say, 10 years or so?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for allowing me to be here. When I first came into homelessness, which was in 2012, the statistics that were always used at the time about causes of homelessness, essentially there were these twin causes of homelessness: the ending of assured short-hold tenancies. Remember, this was the language, essentially evictions from, you know, and the other was relationship breakdown. And I was always told these, you know, and one was slightly more than the other one year, and the next year it was a bit more the other way, but it was always 51% and 49%. And I was never completely convinced by these statistics, because I thought, well, first of all, ending of assured short-hold tenancy essentially means evictions. Well, why on earth is that happening? You know, what's that about, you know? And I think at the time there was this narrative around people being blamed for their homelessness. Essentially, what sat underneath was this idea that people became homeless because they were feckless in some way. So the idea that perhaps people were being evicted from PRS or whatever because they weren't paying their rent, or they weren't behaving properly, and so on. The truth of it is that they were essentially being priced out because landlords wanted to rent for higher rents, and people couldn't afford that because the LHA rates didn't cover it, and so on. So the truth that underlied that statistic was essentially it was the true cause of homelessness in that situation was poverty, and a benefit system that didn't cover rents, and a set of landlords that were trying to essentially rent to a different cohort. And relationship breakdown, I always used to think to myself, well, hang on a minute, why would relationship breakdown cause homelessness? Lots of my middle-class friends get divorced. They don't become homeless, you know. The guy just goes and lives in some lame-ass £600 a month studio and listens to the Smiths for a few months until they go on Tinder and sort themselves out or something like that, you know. Well, hang on a minute, what's the direct relationship, causal relationship between relationship breakdown and homelessness? It's poverty. It's people whose relationships break down and they have no viable alternative to finding themselves without anywhere to live because they're poor. And so I was never completely convinced by those statistics. And then if you just bring that up to date and talk about what's happening around the country, when I go and visit members and say, what are the drivers in your context now? Much more they're talking about the failure of other systems to adequately meet the needs of people. People coming out of prison onto the streets, people coming out of hospital onto the streets, people coming out of care onto the streets, people coming out of the asylum system onto the streets, and then having to try and find a way back into accommodation through some of these torturous routes like verification and so on and so forth. So I think that's a huge part of what's going on nowadays. Is that there are system failures creating homelessness that then has to be resolved in this kind of expensive way. It's the reason why I think that this move to a prevention-focused strategy, which is what we've been mooted, what we've been promised, is what we are asking for, is completely the right thing to do. I should say, I do think that the housing system and the homelessness system are different systems. I do agree that if you had a functioning housing system, a decent housing strategy, you might not need a separate homelessness strategy, but I think that's a long way off for now.
Thank you. Matt, can I pick up on the point that you made in your excellent presentation just now around vision? And how there's been no real decision made around what type of system of help we want to offer, whether it's universal, targeted, or no help at all. Can you just give us a bit more? I want to dive into that in a bit more detail. The conversations that you've had with people, why have we not made any decisions on this? Is it political unwillingness to talk about it? Is it a lack of joined up thinking? Is it an inability to bring the right people together? Like, what's preventing this from happening?
Well, I think, largely speaking, it's because certainly in England, it's not the same in Scotland and Wales, but in England, the national conversation and policy making on kind of what the sort of housing and homelessness bit of the welfare state is kind of stopped in 1977. So it was the National Assistance Act after the war, and then the Homelessness Act in 1977 added, really for the first time anywhere around the world, real entitlements for people to be rehoused that were, at the time, incredible and really world-leading. And at the time, because of the affordability of that scenario in that kind of the dying days of that kind of that Labour government, they had to make some kind of compromises and say, well, only some people can get help. There's only so much housing to go round. And you can understand that, and you've talked to the people who were around at the time, and they were saying, well, it's better to get something than nothing. But you also talked to the people at the time, and they said that wasn't meant to be the end of the conversation. And this massive, overly legalistic sector sprung up to administrate that system of highly kind of regulated legal entitlements and kind of tripwires for people. And so what we're busy doing is administrating that. And there's lots to be proud of in that. And I do think we ought to be, God knows it must be awful being a housing officer in a local council. We ought to celebrate the fact that people do that job and the fact that lots of homelessness is resolved. But we've lost the sort of any of the founding kind of vision of what that system is for. So both what it does is give an incomplete answer to a complete nightmare, which Quajo has outlined. And it also, what it does is it sort of, it loads all of our response into crisis intervention. And there have been many attempts, the Homelessness Reduction Act is one of them, to try and get this back to kind of prevention and to not have to be homeless and in a dreadful state by the time the local authorities and the state says, okay, we're going to help you. So I think a vision that would say, do you know what, we're going to use all of our assets to say everyone that can have their homelessness avoided will, and for the people left, it's going to be immediate access to housing and support. I don't think that's controversial. And it may take some time to get there, but it does require a vision, and it requires somebody to say in a position of power, right, this story isn't finished yet. We can finish it in this country.
Quajo, I was really moved by some of the personal stories, both your own and those of your friends and neighbours. When you're speaking with local authorities, government officials, how are they responding to these stories? And what kind of resistance are they giving you? Like, what are the excuses that they're giving you as to why things aren't progressing?
I mean, they all say, oh, it's bad. I mean, they can't really say anything else, I don't think. I think everyone would agree it's absolutely horrific and shouldn't be happening. But then comes the response, or lack of a response in some cases when it's come to local authorities. In terms of the government, they were pretty understanding. I think that Michael Gove was the first housing secretary that I met and had a meeting with. I went in there with a list of about 15 to 20 points written down on an A4 piece of paper that I'd scribbled down on my way in to meet him. And I just put it in front of him and he read it. And he was pretty receptive, pretty responsive to it. I mean, I also knew that he worked in education at the time and made that point in terms of the regulator, because I didn't think they were doing a good enough job when it came to people living in slum-like conditions, and certainly not speaking to residents and the people that matter when they are making complaints, just these massive monster organisations. I said to him, would Ofsted ring up a school when a complaint's been made, ask the head teacher how you're doing, the head teacher says, oh yeah, great, here's an outstanding. That would never happen. So why is it happening within housing when people's health and safety and lives, years on after Grenfell, is being put at risk? I was expecting an argument. I didn't get that. I mean, he understood what it was that I was saying. And the Labour government, I'd say, too. And we've somewhat seen a response to the work that everyone's been doing around this issue in terms of the announcement yesterday, but there's still a lot more that needs to be done, especially when it comes to culture and stigma and behaviour and treatment of residents. And that's something local authorities are absolutely monumentally failing at now. And I know people make the argument, well, they're so cash-strapped and, you know, they're really struggling financially, and I get that to a certain point, but it is still fundamentally not an excuse. Local authorities across England, we have record levels of homelessness. Why have they got over 35,000 empty council properties? Thousands of them sat empty for longer than a year, in one case 20 years, or over 20 years, nearly as long as I've been alive, it's been sat empty, yet we've got record levels of people on council waiting lists. It made no sense to me whatsoever, and then you're turning people away in their most desperate time of need, or just speaking to them with pure disrespect. I've seen many cases where it's happened. I was in one local authority. I took a lady down who was homeless, literally had nowhere to sleep that day, and I went in there. I was in there from the morning to the evening, walked in there, there was absolutely no one there, everyone was working from home. I was pointed to 3 phones and told there's a list of numbers there, phone someone on it and they'd get back to you. We were there, managed to get through after what may have been an hour. That person then, the phone went down and had to call again. We were there until the evening, and then security came up to me saying, oh yeah, we're just about to close. And I'm like, okay, but this person's got nowhere to live. Where do they go? And they said, down to the local police station and sit there and hopefully someone will call you back. I mean, that was their response. And that's the issue that I'm talking about. They complain about financial difficulties, but it costs absolutely nothing to treat people with human decency and respect, and simply to do your jobs as council, which is supposed to be to look after those within your borough, within your constituencies. Rather, in some cases, it seemed as though they were trying to do everything to not have to help. That is the problem.
I've got so many questions, but I really don't want to hog the floor. I want to open it up to all of you. So can I get a show of hands to see how many people want to ask questions? Well, we'll start at the back and then we'll work our way down. I'll take a couple of the gentlemen with the, just there.
Yeah, hi. My name's Dominic Williamson. I'm a consultant working around homelessness stuff. A couple of things. I wanted to kind of just frame a question, really. And first of all, to Kwadwo, really, because I sat here listening to your story. I've been working around the homelessness and housing field for a very long time, and as have lots of us. And I think the first thing I wanted to do was to apologise, because we failed. We failed people like you and your sister and your dad, because we failed to make the case. Despite big organisations with lots of money and lots of charities, we haven't won the argument. And that made me think, Becky, when you started speaking, you talked about party conferences. I've been to a lot of party conferences trying to make the case. And the party that's just lost power in this country, the Conservative Party, if you went to their housing fringe events, and I've been to lots of them, the first thing that would happen when you started talking about housing is that a show of hands would go up, and people would say, as a landlord, and the next person would, as a landlord, as a landlord. And I think this is the thing that we need to sort of think about and confront, because there's a lot of people for whom the housing system over the last 30, 40 years has been the basis of their wealth. And Kwadwo, something I totally disagreed with you about is that homelessness can happen to anyone. As Rick said, there's a huge number of people in this country, they are never going to be homeless. They are never going to be homeless because of wealth, and the basis of that wealth often is the fact that they have multiple properties which they are making income on. So my question is, as a country, are we going to be able to really tackle this until we confront and really think about the unequal distribution of housing assets and wealth as the core reason why it's politically difficult to get the solutions that we need?
Yeah, excellent. Okay, the lady with the yellow dress on behind, just there. And then...
Hello, hi, my name is Bridget. I'm from the No Accommodation Network. We are a network of about 140 charities around the UK supporting people facing homelessness and destitution in the asylum and immigration system. And I'm glad my trick of wearing a bright dress so I could be spotted for questions worked. My question is something that a number of you've picked up on the panel around really fantastic comments and speeches around kind of the vision that we need, what we need to really hold on to as important around, treating people with dignity, tackling poverty, having a vision where everyone deserves a home. And we believe part of, not the only reason, I definitely agree that financialization is part of it, but part of the reason is the scapegoating, and particularly around scapegoating refugees, people seeking asylum. So what can we do to help tackle that narrative while being part of the solution to building the vision for everyone deserves a home, no one needs to be homeless? Sort of a dual, a dual tactic, and what are your thoughts around that?
Excellent,
Thank you.
thank you. And then we'll just do one more, and then we'll take the three all together. The lady just there with the red top on the grey suit.
Hi, I want to ask all of you, and also
Sorry,
especially...
can you say what was your name and where?
Oh, sorry. I'm Rumana Kabir, and I'm a trustee of World Habitat.
Thank you.
So what I want to ask is that, when Matt said that, there was this sign about homeless people will come in, lock your door. And I think the whole nation, the entire European region is afraid of that. And we are spending 2.5 trillion in defense in the spending review. So I was trying to do the calculation. I can't figure out the zeros and what's the percentage of this is going to housing, yeah? 29 billion compared to 2.3 billion. So we are really scared as a nation and as a region. So what's the bigger thinking about the vision of all these refugees, migrants coming in? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got fear of homeless people and migrants, we've got scapegoating and blame and the narrative around that, and then we've got confronting the unequal distribution of wealth. Who would like to go first?
I'm
going to start at the I'm going to start at the end and then work my way back down. So Rick, I'm going to pick on you first.
Good luck.
just some small issues there, yeah.
Well, first of all, you can't build a wall around an island, So anyone who thinks that they can control migration is silly. So I believe that nearly all of the money spent on trying to control migration is wasted, if I'm honest. That is my personal opinion, based on good evidence from thousands of years of human history. People are drawn towards wealth, and if I was living in extreme poverty and escaping war, I would migrate towards wealth, and nothing would stop me. Nothing would stop me. And that is the nature of human existence. So that one's covered off. All money spent on immigration control is wasted money. There you go. I used to think homelessness was caused by capitalism, but that's such a teenage thing to think. The teenage punk in me would like to say that homelessness is caused by capitalism, but there will always be wealthy people. I have a problem with that wealth being generated by the exploitation of the poor. Fundamentally, I think, wealth generated on the backs of poverty is wrong. And sadly, the private housing system seems to be built around that premise, and we place a ridiculous value on what is essentially some bricks and some wires and some tiles. We place a ridiculous value, overinflate the value of what is essentially a sort of box. And I think that I don't know how we deal with that, except that if you have more boxes, that will bring down the value, And if those boxes are controlled more by the state, and the state can choose who to put in the boxes, so that those people can then create homes, then I think that's the right way to do things. And Labour appear to be, you know, yesterday, I'm in a good mood today because of yesterday, and I think Labour appear to be standing up and putting themselves in a position to do something about that. So there's some hope in there, I think.
Thank you. Susan, you touched on migration when we first started speaking. Maybe you want to pick up on that point.
Yeah, I think Bridget's question was, how do we tackle the stigma? And I'm usually a a glass half full type of person at the moment, and so Glasgow we've got the largest concentration of asylum applications, I think, as a city in the UK. I think that's it. And what we also have in Scotland. So what's interesting and what might come out today is the way that different legislations between Scottish government, UK government, taxation, all of these different policies and laws, they interconnect in a bad way. And so the Scottish government, I think, removed local connection from the homelessness legislation. That's a good thing. What that seems to have meant in Glasgow is that asylum seekers who have maybe been living anywhere in the UK are gravitating towards Glasgow because we've got such a good critical mass of infrastructure and support organisations, and the work we do in Glasgow with refugees and the way that we welcome or have welcomed people from other countries fleeing war in Scotland is something I'm really, really proud of. We have the rise of the Reform Party in Scotland in a way that is unbelievable. I'm sure it's happening around the UK. And actually, that's where my glass goes half empty quite quickly, because they are fueling really negative rhetoric about refugees in a pretty nasty way. And so what that means is that we have got an increase in refugees that are seeking homes because of the way that Home Office legislation is happening, and we can't cope. There literally aren't enough houses. The council's buckling under the pressure. And so that's the real situation that's going on in Glasgow just now. The only way I can think of to tackle stigma is in our own personal behaviours and how we show up. I always go, I don't spend a lot of my time in policy and legislation and analysing that. I just want to get money and buy homes and give people good homes. That's all my life focuses on. But I just think, you know, I was really touched by what you were saying about how people were treated. We're all human beings. We know how to treat people well. We should treat with compassion. So I think the only way I know how to tackle stigma is to be kind and treat people well whenever they're in front of us, and maybe lead by example and call people out when they don't.
Yeah. Kwadwo, I know that you were quite keen to come in and answer that. Was there one of these questions in particular that you wanted to respond to?
Yeah, I think in terms of the immigration argument, it's going to take a lot of education, especially using facts. I mean, a lot of what people are fed is off of the likes of Twitter, or by individuals that are part of Reform, let's say the Conservative Party. Some journalists are putting information out there which is factually incorrect, and I don't think it's all baked in just racism. There are big groups, unfortunately, where it is just channeled in pure racism. But I think within the working class community, and often they are used as political football when it comes to politicians, especially when it comes to them wanting to deflect away from issues that they in fact have caused. We've seen it through history where migrants are used as that pawn almost of blame for everyone else to blame. And within working class communities, people are really, really struggling at the moment, and they're being fed this information by certain politicians and within the media, and fundamentally believe it without actually looking at the facts. And that's why it's our jobs to give those facts. People saying, for example, illegal migrants come over here and they get the keys to social housing, or they're living in I don't know, the Hilton Hotel. It's factually incorrect. They have no recourse to public funds and living on about £40 a week. And for many of them, coming from positions that we could never possibly imagine having to endure and live in. No one crosses the channel in an inflatable dinghy for the fun of it, right? And I even saw on social media the other day, I think it was either a journalist or a member of a party turn around and say, oh, because Robert Jenrick went down to the station recording on one of the underground stations, let's take a camera down and go and pop some dinghies. At what point did that become socially acceptable? And that's part of the problem. It starts with educating those people that are believing this information, which is just wrong. This crisis existed for decades. And I wanted to say about the distribution of houses really quickly. I think that's a really important point. In fact, I was in an Uber the other day and I was talking to the Uber driver about my work, and he said he's a landlord. He went to a conference recently and there were a load of landlords there, and he explained to me there was one individual with a portfolio of about 100 properties. Why? Why have we allowed this during the biggest housing crisis since the Second World War, where one individual can own that many properties when people can't get on the housing ladder, young people can't get on the housing ladder, they're stuck on council waiting lists, can't afford private rents, and those individuals are allowed to rent all of those properties out at market rate, which is completely unaffordable. It's greed. It's profiting off of the back of a crisis and a necessity, which is shelter and everyone needs. It's wrong, so I completely agree with that point. Can't remember who made it. Oh, yeah.
Matt, I really do want to hear what you have to say on this, but I'm also very conscious of time. Do you mind if we just take a couple of extra questions and then we can come back to your response? Is that all right?
Sure.
Excellent, thank you.
Sorry.
Right, hands up. Let's take some from down this bottom flight. We've got another lady in another fabulous yellow dress just here. Let's have a question from here. And then is there anybody in this middle section here who has a question? Lady just down here.
Thank you. One quick comment and then a question. I'm from Adelaide and I'm a politician. Please don't throw things at me. In my remit, we have homelessness and many other sort of birth to death vulnerability matters as human services. And I could be sitting in Adelaide except for the accents that are in front of me. The story is the same, the journey is the same. The post-war investment of social housing en masse and then the divestment of that and the profiteering from private rental. I am sitting in my own country. So just some peace with you to know that you're not alone. But I am very interested as well, knowing that I did read many stories regarding terrible consequences of putting people en masse into office blocks to try and solve a crisis. And we haven't gone down that track in spite of very good lobby groups who just want to see people off the streets, pushing us to use empty office blocks. I'm interested in your experience with that. We are, it's Australia's bigger but tinier from population, so we're investing a smaller billions of dollars in housing. So I'm just interested in the consequences of some of that crisis work that has happened and to assist me to continue to push that away and just invest in bricks and mortar.
Excellent, thank you. And then just here, please. Just here. Thank you.
Thanks. Is it on? Yeah. I'm Leilani Farha. I am the global director of an international human rights organization called The Shift, and we focus on housing. So I have the advantage of being an internationalist, I suppose, and when someone like me looks at the UK, what I see is empire and deeply embedded in all of your institutions, in your country, in its formation, deep discrimination and exclusivity and a lack of understanding of universality for human rights, despite the fact that you have universal health care and a decent education system. Universal, decent. Anyway, so So these days, I'm stymied by that, and this isn't. It's not. There's not just one empire, although the UK may think so. There are a few other empires. I come from one. Canada is an empire of its own, but I'm really struggling with how do we, like, we all have day jobs, and how do we undo? Like, I think we need a complete rethinking of the nation state and the institutions, all of the institutions that are propping up that nation state. And so I don't know if you all are thinking about that too, and just like sort of, I don't know, I guess I'm looking for a little inspiration on that big systemic piece, especially from Quad Joe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'll just end by saying thank you so very much for being courageous and generous with your expertise and knowledge and experience.
Thank you.
So we have, according to the clock here, 13 seconds in which to address everything else. So what I'm going to suggest is that maybe, Matt, you didn't get chance before to speak, so I'm going to allow you to just make a few kind of maybe closing remarks, picking up on some of these issues, and then I think we're going to go to the break, is that right? And then maybe we can have some coffee and continue the conversation in a more informal space. Is that right with you, David? Yep. Excellent. So Matt, over to you. No pressure.
What I'm going to do is sort of fight back against the echo chamber a little bit, actually.
Yeah.
I think that in the real world of trying to do something about this, you do things, for example, like look at the stats on landlords and you discover 40% of them are accidental landlords with one property, and actually if you talk to them, you can do really good things to unlock that stock. And if we label all landlords as evil, then we're in trouble. I think that if you speak to people in communities where all the hotels are full of homeless households, whether they're refugees or not, and all the private rented sector is full of Airbnbs, people have noticed their communities have changed. So unless we respond to that, we are in an echo chamber, and I think there are good progressive ways of responding to all of those things. I can't let your question go, which if I've understood it is kind of how to fight back against kind of the wrong solutions. And I would say that one of the great things of the last few years is we have much more evidence that not responding with temporary and emergency accommodation, which can be awful, is a very good way to start. And actually the evidence for really good housing-led approaches to even the most acute circumstance can be difficult to sustain. There are lots of forces of people saying the best thing to do is the moral thing of lots of queues of beds or whatever. You've got to fight against it. The evidence is really solid the other way around. But kind of, to me, the purpose of World Habitat is to get going on what can be done, and maybe after a gin later I can answer Leilani's question.
There's been some really insightful questions, thank you. Some big issues for us to explore. I know that coffee is being served over in the Oslo Long Room where we were first thing when we registered. So please, can we thank Rick, Susan, Kwajo and Matt for their excellent contributions. And I look forward to more discussion over coffee. Thank you very much.